Good morning, everyone. It's exciting to see you guys here. My name's Jana Schaich Borg, and I call myself a neuroscientist who's been adopted by data scientists and computer scientists. Happy to answer questions about that later. And as Daryl said, I was lucky enough to be here at the first one of these 2 years ago, and it was one of my favorite conferences of the year, and so I was really excited that there was going to be another one and that I was lucky enough to be invited. Now, I will tell you that I took the title of this conference seriously, Empathic AI, Metascience, and Methodology. And I want to tell you, it takes a very special kind of person to both host a conference in methodology and want to come to a conference in methodology. Usually that's not people's favorite stuff, but I'm one of the few people who actually really cares about methodology. And so today I wanted to focus on an aspect of our work that I don't usually get to talk about because it's really a question about methods, okay? So to get into this, I want to start by stepping back and basically echoing what Daryl said. I mean, it's been a wild 2 years for people studying empathy. Right? I still remember when the first paper came out, reporting that people find ChatGPT's responses more empathic than human responses. Right? And since then, there's just been study after study after study showing this in various different kinds of ways. And now there's even a meta-analysis that shows that this is pretty consistent across studies, that people tend to find AI's responses more empathic than humans. But yet we also find these other kinds of surprising results, like this result from here in Penn State and also Michael Lindsett, where despite the fact people say that AI's responses are more empathic, they still will often, not all the time, but will often choose human responses anyway. And in some cases, even wait a year if that's what it takes to get a human response, right? And so this has felt surprising and like a lot. And it's led to a lot of different debates about, well, where should empathic AI be used and not used? Ethically, practically, scientifically, all of the above. And these are some of the sides of that debate from an academic standpoint, but that's also the debates are playing out in our communities, right? So people are wondering, should I have an AI therapist? Should I let my kid have an AI therapist? What about friends? Should I have an AI friend? They're supposed to be great. Should I get one too? Should I let my children have AI friends? And I don't know about you, but I feel like usually when people have opinions in this space, they tend to be very strong opinions, either definitely yes and definitely no. And they're often based on this flurry of results we've seen in these past 2 years. So what I want to do today is invite you to think about this question with me, right? What if the main reason this flurry of results feels so surprising and provoking is that we all think we're measuring the same thing, but we aren't. Okay. Now I'm going to show you a bunch of different types of data today, some from my lab, some from other labs. Not all of it is published, but you can get a lot of the ideas if you want to see something written down about much of what I'm going to say today from this paper I wrote with Hannah Reid, who's standing right there and is going to present later this afternoon from 2024. But in that paper, we talk about how everyone in the empathy field, in any case, agrees that empathy suffers from a jingle-jangle problem. And this isn't my term. This is from Holland Schwartz's wonderful review from 2022. And they say, empathy jingles because there are perhaps as many definitions as there are authors of the field. And I would actually argue there are more definitions than there are authors in this field. And it jangles because people often use different words to refer to the same concept under the broader empathy umbrella. Now, I think most people acknowledge that this is the case, but here's where I think we get into trouble, is I think many of us in the research world say, well, this is just an academic problem. It's not a conceptual problem. The assumption is everyone knows what empathy is, we just haven't figured out how to define it. And if you want to see that written in words, this is from a paper. This is verbatim from the paper, a paper describing yet another empathy scale, where they said, although we all have an understanding of what empathy means, there is no general agreement on a definition sufficient for scientific inquiry. So this certainly suggests that we're kind of treating it as, well, we all know what empathy means. We're just not good at figuring out the words. Let's have philosophers and psychologists duke that out, but it's not a big deal. It's just a verbal problem. But here's the thing. I don't think that's the case, okay? And in fact, for many years now, at least since 2021, we've had evidence that lay people have quite different ideas of what empathy means. So I'm first going to show you results not from my lab, but again from Holland Schwartz's lab. I'm here with Fred Duong. This was from 2021, where they asked lay people, hey, what do you think empathy is? And they had them write it out, whatever was in their mind. And then they analyzed that free text, okay? And so this is a figure from their paper. And what you can see are many different rows here. Each of these rows is a different group of things that people self-reported. So you see there's perspective taking, there's emotion sharing, there's pro-social action. There's also relating, connecting, bonding. There's, especially in lay people concepts, there's really this idea of I need to jive with you in some way for empathy to be there. And there are many different other ones here, okay? But the key thing is that no characteristic was mentioned by more than 59% of participants, okay? So that means that there are no aspects of empathy that everyone agrees on. So if we kind of think about this table, there are at least two observations we can make, right? The first is when lay people assess how much empathy something has, they're likely using different definitions of empathy. Those numbers up there showed 30% of people would mention one thing, 30% of people would mention another. Some would mention, those don't all add up to 100 because some people would mention different groups. Some people would only mention one, all right? So we don't all actually agree on what empathy means. It's not just an academic linguistic problem. Here's another observation we can make from that. There are a lot of capacities, behaviors, and phenomena people associate with empathy, right? There are a lot of rows in that table. And each one of those describe a different class of things that people, at least some people somewhere, ascribe to empathy, right? I'm gonna call those things fine cuts, and that's in homage to James Blair's paper from 2008, where he talked about the fine cuts of empathy and how they can help explain differences between psychopathy and autism. And that term has come up a couple of different times, including this paper from 2025. So I'm just using it to say these are different aspects of empathy that we can consider. Now, one of the things we wanted to get a handle on is what are all these different fine cuts? How wide is that net? All right, and so Hull and Schwartz, when they came up with the rows for that table, they came up with those rows based on three specific assessments from the empathy field. So they were using the concepts those assessments were supposed to assess to figure out what they would label those categories in those rows. And if you're interested in what those are, those three assessments were the interpersonal reactivity index, which if you've been in the empathy field, you've probably used at least once, the affective and cognitive measure of empathy, and the empathy quotient, all right? But we wanted to broaden the net to consider a wider range of possible empathy fine cuts than just the ones that were considered in those three assessments. So here's what we did. We started with some academic definitions of empathy, both from philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, even some slightly bigger disciplines like computer science. And these are some of the ones you'll see in that 2004 paper Hannah and I wrote. But then we kept going and we looked for, okay, what about some more popular ideas of empathy? So these are still somewhat academic, but these are books and conceptions of empathy that are supposed to be for the broader audience, right? And you will see many different things in those than you usually see in our academic definitions. But then we went a step further, and we looked into blogs and to popular posts about what empathy is. Like this Reddit one, what are the best ways to show empathy in a conversation? That was an amazing set of responses to be able to read. And you can see this other one, 32 phrases to help you express empathy. So it gives you a sense of what people are looking for when they're looking for how do you convey empathy and how do you receive it, okay? So when we went through this process, we came up with at least 39 empathy fine cuts, right? I'm not saying that this is the final set by any means, but I'm saying we came up with at least 39 different empathy fine cuts. And to give you an idea of what those might look like, here's one that's probably pretty similar to something you might normally think anyway. An empathizer actually has and conveys real, genuine emotions that are appropriate for what you're going through. So the individual truly feels emotions that are fitting to what you're going through and expresses those emotions. That probably drives at least a little bit. But here's one that's pretty different. Wants to learn more about you. The individual shows interest in you and invests time and effort to learn more about you. Here's another one. Redirects conversation only when helpful. The individual shifts the focus of conversation when doing so would benefit you and not when doing so would make you feel ignored or dismissed. Now, if you are academics in empathy, I bet I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, that's not empathy. I know what empathy is. I have a way we've been operationalized, and I've been debating this. That's not empathy, right? My point is, we don't all agree, okay? So we wanted to actually find out. We came up with these because someone somewhere said that they thought it was important for empathy. So then we asked a group of 300 people, all right, here's our 39 fine cuts. How detrimental or essential do you think this characteristic or skill is for empathy? I'm going to show you a figure on the next slide, and it's going to be visually overwhelming, so I'm going to warn you. But don't worry, the details aren't what I'm trying to show you. It's the big picture, and I'm going to walk you through it, all right? Here are the results. On this side are all of our fine cuts. You can't read the fine print. That's not important. Happy to tell you about them later. What I want you to notice is how much green you're seeing. Okay? The green is when they say that it's important to absolutely essential for empathy. I'm just showing you this white box here because that covers the detrimental side. So you can see all of them have green, right? Lots of green. And just to show you the full data, this is what the full data looks like. A lot of green, right? And most of it is the dark green. So very important to absolutely essential. Now, there are some of these at the bottom that have some more blue and gray. Happy to talk about those later, but statistically all except one, ask me about that later too, everyone said are important for empathy, okay? So for almost all of these fine cuts, the majority of people are saying it's very important or absolutely essential for empathy. And the rest of the people are generally saying it's somewhat or at least slightly important for empathy. So this certainly supports, but extends what Hall and Schwartz and Duong were showing us. There are a lot of capacities, behaviors, and phenomena people associate with empathy, certainly not just one, all right? Now you might be wondering, Jana, are you just giving us a new definition of empathy this time with 39 clauses? Because that would be really annoying. And I want to assure you, for many reasons, the answer is no, okay? Many reasons that I'm not saying that's what we're doing. I'm going to dig into just a few of those right now, all right? So the first observation we need to make from previous studies is that empathy fine cuts, even though they're going to use different fine cuts, I'm using it as a kind of a broad class term here, often, but don't always co-occur. Okay, so this is not my own study. This is from Michael Inzet's lab, and they did an experience sampling study. This was in 2021. And so I don't remember the exact details, but they basically sent a text to participants at some random time during the day, and they said, did you experience empathy recently? I just can't remember if it was the past 15 minutes, 30 minutes, or an hour, but it was something like that. And so if they said yes, then they asked some follow-up questions. When you felt empathy, that's critical, that's what they said. When you felt empathy, did you also experience emotion sharing? Well, I don't think they used the word also, just to clarify. Did you experience emotion sharing? Did you experience perspective taking? Did you experience compassion? All right? And this is a figure from their paper, and one of the main results is that big blue, kind of light blue circle in the middle. 75% of the time when they said they were feeling empathy, they felt all three of those things, those three fine cuts, all right? But that also means that 25% of the time, they weren't. That means they were saying they were feeling empathy, but at one point, they might feel it just compassion and perspective taking. At a different time, they might feel emotion sharing and perspective taking. And another time, they might feel all three. But in all three cases, they use the word empathy, okay? So empathy fine cuts often, but don't always co-occur. And it also means that when we use the word empathy, we don't always mean the same thing, right? Even with our own lives. Now, one of the other things we started arguing quite a bunch of years ago is that we don't always want these empathy fine cuts to co-occur either. And this is important for some of the ethical implications that I'd love to discuss over coffee, all right? And to give you an intuition for that, how many of you think it would probably be a good thing if a customer service agent at least had some amount of empathy? Raise your hands, please. I think I see the majority of the room, and I'm curious for those of you who aren't raising your hands, I'm going to come after you later and find out if you were just being lazy or you actually think that. All right, so it was at least the majority of the room. Now, what about a friend? How many of you think it would be a good thing if a friend had empathy? Raise your hands. Okay, now I think I saw everyone, maybe because you're scared. I'm going to come after you later. All right. I want you to imagine a human Amazon customer service agent saying that they really care about you when you're expressing your frustration. How many of you would find that nice versus creepy? This is a customer service agent saying, I really care about you. Raise your hand if you'd find it nice. Okay, a couple. How many of you would find it creepy? Seems like the vast majority said creepy. Okay. Now imagine a friend that said they really care about you when you're expressing your frustration, right? How many of you would find that nice? I'd be in that category. How many of you would find that creepy? No one, maybe, a little creepy. Okay, good. I want to talk about that later too. So I've asked this kind of informally many times, and the results almost always appear exactly what we just saw. Everyone says, almost everyone said, or no, I shouldn't say that. The majority of people say that empathy is important for both the customer service and the friendship, more so for the friendship. More people think it would be creepy for someone to say they care about you in the customer service setting than in the friend setting. Okay, so we wanted to quantify this. I'm giving you an idea of kind of how we're investigating this. We have two different fine cuts that are related to saying they care. Okay, and so one of those is they say they care, but they don't really mean it, and the other is they say they care and they do mean it. All right, so I'm just showing you the results here for just the customer service setting and the friend setting for these two fine cuts. All right, so what you're seeing is that although the means are slightly above neutral in the customer service case, and I should say this is a different sample, this is 150 participants, but we'll have others. The responses, so it's a little bit above neutral, again, in the customer service case, but the responses certainly dip into the detrimental territory. So not even just neutral, but they dip into the detrimental territory, regardless of whether the agent means it or doesn't mean it when they say they care about you. But in the friend case, it's almost at ceiling. The maximum, absolutely essential, is 4. Okay, so in the friend case, it's almost absolutely essential that they say they care about you and really care. But at least some people think that it's even worse to say you care about your friend and don't mean it than to say a customer service agent to do that, right? So this is to give you a sense that people saying that you care is something that's important for empathy. So this is an empathy fine cut, and this is give you a sense of we want different versions of this fine cut in different contexts. So this is just a little snippet, but we've looked at this across 6 different contexts, including the friend and customer service agent. These are some of the others. And I'm just going to give you some of the broad results we've gotten from some of those studies, okay? And this is just to tell you this from this particular sample, again, 150 participants. They say that empathy is important for all of these cases. Usually, some of our other samples, there's actually no difference, which has surprised us between how much empathy they think a friend should have and a customer service agent should have. But in all cases, they say that empathy is important for all of these, okay? So here's what we ask people. Which of the following best describes the kind or flavor of empathy you personally want in these 6 different professional or social roles? Here's what we got, right? The majority of people said they want a somewhat different kind of empathy in these 6 different roles, and 22% say they want very different kinds of empathy in these different roles, all right? So this supports a view of empathy that we've been talking about for many years now, where I think we should be thinking of empathy as an umbrella term for many different related, often but not always co-occurring skills and capacities, fine cuts, and that we want different constellations of these in different contexts, okay? But this raises an interesting question, methodological question. I've given you evidence that people say they want empathy in different contexts. I've also given you evidence that people want different kinds of empathy in different contexts. This raises a question, are they actually knowingly using the word empathy differently in different contexts, okay? So we decide to ask them. We also can show you some analyses that support this, but I'm just going to give you their subjective reports, okay? Which of these statements best describes what you personally mean when you say someone has empathy across these 6 different professional or social roles? 51% say they mean somewhat different things. 10% say they mean very different things. So the majority of people are saying, I don't mean the same thing when I use the word empathy across different contexts, all right? So people self-report using the word empathy differently in different contexts. Now, in my last couple of minutes, what does this have to do with AI? Well, I've told you that people want different kinds of empathy in different contexts. Well, those contexts also include whether you're talking to an AI or a human, or you're interacting with an AI or a human, right? We ask, which of the following best describes the kind or flavor of empathy you personally want from humans and AIs? Here are the results. I actually can't read them from over here, so I'm going to read them from over here. 43% said very different kinds. That's a big group, right? 33% said somewhat different kinds. Only 24% said they want the same kind of empathy from humans and AIs. But now here's the methodological question. Which of these statements best describes what you personally mean when you say or human AI has empathy? Now the results are even stronger. All right, a full 53%, the majority, say they mean something different, very different, when they say a human has empathy than when they say an AI has empathy. They use the same word, but they know they mean something different, okay? So people want different kinds of empathy in different contexts, and they use the word empathy differently in those different contexts too. So to me, this is an assessment problem. Okay, because it's very hard to be aware of all of this variation and all these different directions I described when all we ask in our studies is how much empathy does something have? Or how empathic is this response? And we're making assumptions about the definition that they're bringing to the table, right? So what does this mean for measurement and for assessing empathy moving forward? I wish I could give you a strong answer. I can't. I don't know the right answer. But I can say there are at least two paths that we can consider. Right? The first one is that we keep using empathy, the word empathy, the way we have. And there's many reasons to do that. We have a whole 100 of years worth of literature based on the word empathy. So keep going that direction, but be more honest in our interpretations about what it could mean and force each other when we're writing our papers into thinking about the results to say, well, wait, can any of this be explained by people bringing in different empathy or different definitions of empathy? Another is to focus on just fine cuts instead, or at least at the same time. So instead of asking just about empathy, focus on a single or say a couple of the fine cuts and find out what's happening with those. There are pros and cons to that. We've been doing a lot of that work, but I can tell you until we figure out which fine cuts are most important, it's a lot of fine cuts to ask about. And we don't even have the final set, right? So there's a lot of just practical challenges with going through all of that. So I think probably the answer in the short term is some combination of the two. But I think as a field, we should have some bigger goals, methodological goals, that I would love to see people in this room contribute to. One is we need to figure out which fine cuts are most informative. And I think we're going to need some creative psychological approaches to that, but also some data-driven kind of data science approaches to figuring that out. The other is that I think we need to develop assessments to determine each individual's working definitions of empathy so that we can go into an experiment and still ask them about empathy in general, but then have a concise assessment where we get a sense of, for that person, what do they mean when they say empathy in this context, so that we can use that in our analyses. In the meantime, I want us to at least be thinking about maybe the reason we've observed so many surprising results over the past few years is because we're measuring different things. And I think this also has ethical implications that I'd be happy to talk about later. So I just wanted to say a lot of the work you saw up here was done by Alicia Silke, who's sitting right over there, and I hope you check out her poster. Thank you, and I look forward to your comments and your questions. I'll try not to trip over this thing and die in the process.
Awesome. I completely agree with your diagnosis of the problem. I worry there's one additional problem,
Great.
Which is it seems everything here is self-report. If you ask people, do you want sycophantic AIs? Do I want empathetic customer service? No, for a lot of people here. But empirically, at least for the sycophantic, that's wrong. And so I wonder how many of your questions of what do you want are in fact people don't know what they want?
I love all of that comment. And I would say, I just want to also qualify, the answer isn't quite no that they don't want sycophantic AI. It's that we're not very good at temporal discounting. So we might feel in the long run, we don't want sycophantic AI, but right now it sure feels good, so I'm going to take it now. We don't know where along that spectrum it is. That's a problem that existed in psychology and computer science and economics for a long time. And so I think it's something we always have to be thinking about. And the way people generally handle it is by using multiple types of evidence and see where they converge, right? So in our work, we also make them make choices and make decisions. And though that is supposed to reflect closer to their actual preferences, although still, unless we're actually having them spend money or something, then it's still not economists wouldn't say it's not a real choice. There are also ways you can get at it using either psychological approaches for kind of implicit attitudes, or if people are familiar with this term from computer science, elicitation methods, where we try to infer what their actual choices and model is based on when asking them to make a whole bunch of choices where it's kind of hard to get us tripped up. So that's not a nice, pretty answer.
And you find them roughly consistent.
Roughly consistent, but I think so. Another hat I wear, a big part of my work is on moral AI. How do you build morality into AI? So they're not always consistent, and I think part of the technical, ethical, psychological work we have to do is what do we do when they're inconsistent? Great question.
Thanks. That was a great talk. It's Alex London from Carnegie Mellon. So I have a question, methodological question about how we interpret questions like, did you feel X? So did you feel that someone had taken your perspective? Because someone taking your perspective is a kind of relational concept that requires a certain type of cognitive activity on the part of a person. But saying, did you feel that way, kind of, razors that off, because it's sort of saying, did you get the effect that you would have had that happened? And so I'm wondering, because you've got things on there where it's like, but the person didn't mean it, right? About the degree to which feeling that way, asking the question that way, as it were, separates out the person's experience from what the factiveness of the type of experience that they had. So you could be made to feel a certain way, but it could be false because there's, like the antecedent isn't satisfied.
Okay, I'm going to say a bunch of different things and tell me if it answers or at least addresses your question enough. Okay. So one thing I want to say is, to pass this back on to all of us as a community, I actually think we need to run the experiments with all these different variations. And I think part of the problem is those nature studies I put up there use all those different variations and we're acting as if they're the same. One word can convey something that certainly makes it seem like the thing we're talking about actually has that, or has feelings or something like that. And I think a lot of what ends up happening in these studies is that we are implicitly conveying that, and they're making that assumption, then they find out it's an AI and they're like, oh, no, I actually don't think they can have that. So now they're making a response with that new knowledge, right? So I'm just saying, I don't have all the answers. I agree with you, those words matter, and I think we need to do more work mapping that out. Now, in terms of what people want, I'll tell you I was a little surprised by what we've seen so far. So we have a bunch of these fine cuts that are kind of go in gradations of, do you have this thing for real and you convey it? Or you have this thing for real, but you don't convey it. Or you say you have this thing, but you don't have it. Now, if you are confused by that, think about in your own personal relationships, if you have a significant other. Sometimes you're like, why don't you have empathy for me? And sometimes you're like, no, they have it. They just suck at conveying it, right? Other times you're like, I don't care if you suck at conveying it. I need you to convey it. And then sometimes you're like, you know what? I actually don't care if you have empathy, but I want you to be nice to me, so just pretend, right? And so I actually expected people to not want the pretending version at all. That's actually not the case. They tend to want it less in all of the different fine cuts. They want it less than the other one, but they still often want it. So back to this, really have it or not, I think that's still up in the air. I think we have a lot of work to figure that out. And I've already had myself proven wrong. Did that kind of address your question? Thank you.
All right, we probably should move on, but thank you very much, Jana.
Thanks, everybody.